Officer Sarah Okafor was 31 seconds from walking down the aisle when her K-9 partner sat down in front of her and refused to move. Not growling, not barking, just sitting. Squarely between her and the church doors, 78 pounds of Belgian Malinois named Atlas, looking up at her with the specific expression she had learned to read over 4 years of working together. The one that meant, "I have found something and I need you to stop." Sarah had been a K-9 handler long enough to know the difference between a dog reacting to stress and a dog working. Stress produced agitation, pacing, whining, unfocused energy. This was not that. Atlas was still. His nose was cycling in the slow, deliberate rhythm she recognized from active deployments. His ears were forward and his eyes were on the side door of the hallway. Not the main entrance, the side door, the one that led to the back section of the church where the groomsmen had been getting ready. He was not reacting to the crowd or the noise or the flowers or the 70-degree air inside St. Catherine's. He had found something specific. He was showing it to her. "Give me a minute," Sarah said to no one in particular. The bridesmaids behind her went quiet. She crouched down in her wedding dress on the floor of the church hallway and looked at her dog. "Show me," she said quietly. Atlas stood. He turned toward the side door. He took 3 steps and looked back. 4 years, 260 deployments. One false positive. A man in a park with a large quantity of aged cheese, which was the story she told at every departmental gathering, and which was also the entire list of times Atlas had been wrong. Everything else had been real. Sarah stood up. She followed her dog away from her own wedding. Thank you for being here. Please subscribe and like this video. And before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love knowing who's out there listening. Sarah Okafor had been a police officer for 7 years and a K-9 handler for 4 of them. She had come to the work the way most people came to things that suited them completely. Not by plan, but by recognition. She had taken the K-9 unit position because it was available and had discovered within the first month that it was the only kind of police work she had done that felt entirely like itself. The work required 2 things she happened to have in equal measure: patience and the specific ability to be wrong without it breaking you. Working dogs found things humans had missed. That meant, structurally, that you were always entering a situation where a dog understood something you did not yet understand. If you could not tolerate that gap, if you needed to be the one who knew first, you could not do this work. Sarah could tolerate the gap. She had learned, over 4 years, to use it. Atlas had been assigned to her at the start of her 3rd year in the department. Belgian Malinois, 4 years old, 11 months in the working dog program, one previous handler who had transferred to a different unit. The transfer had been the handler's choice. He had described Atlas in the handover notes as intense, which Sarah had read as a complaint and which turned out to be the most accurate single word available for what Atlas was. He paid attention to the world the way very few animals and almost no humans did, completely, without the filter of expectation that caused most beings to miss what was directly in front of them. He did not habituate. He did not get bored. He treated every environment as if it might contain something important, because his training had told him it might, and he had no mechanism for deciding in advance that it probably didn't. This was a quality that made him difficult in certain domestic situations and exceptional in every professional one. In 4 years together, they had found 3 missing children, identified 2 gas leaks before any instrumentation detected them, and flagged 6 individuals carrying concealed weapons before any human officer in the vicinity had grounds for suspicion. They had also, once, responded to an alert in a park that turned out to be a retired teacher with a backpack containing 4 large wheels of aged Gouda he was bringing to a family gathering. Atlas had been entirely correct by his own standards. The compounds were present, the alert was warranted. The cheese had simply been the source. This was the only false positive in 4 years of service. Sarah told the story at every departmental gathering. It was the only funny story she had, which meant she had made sure it was a very good story. She had worked 3 major cases in her 4th year that had changed how she understood the work. The first was a missing 8-year-old in November. Atlas had tracked the child for 9 hours through a deteriorating rain event. losing the scent twice, returning to the last confirmed point each time without being told to, rebuilding the track from what remained. They had found the child in a drainage culvert 4 miles from where she had last been seen, hypothermic but alive, 8 hours and 53 minutes after the alert had been called. Sarah had written in her report that Atlas had made 3 independent decisions during the track that she had not directed, and that she considered all 3 correct in retrospect. Her supervisor had asked her what she meant by independent decisions. She had said, "He knew something I didn't know yet, and he acted on it." Her supervisor had written, "Handler demonstrates strong working relationship with assigned K9." What he meant, Sarah thought, was that he did not have a box for what she was describing. The second case was a warehouse fire in March where Atlas had identified 2 individuals concealed behind a false wall 40 seconds before the structure became unsafe to enter. The third was a traffic stop in August where Atlas had alerted on a vehicle that turned out to contain 11 kilograms of fentanyl in a compartment that had defeated 3 previous inspection attempts by 3 different handlers with 3 different dogs. After that case, her lieutenant had asked her what she thought made Atlas exceptional. She had thought about it for a moment. She had said, "He doesn't decide in advance what he's going to find. He finds what's there." Her lieutenant had nodded the way people nodded when they were going to think about something later. She had met Thomas Reeves at a benefit dinner 19 months ago. He was a structural engineer, 34, precise, with the quality of attention that engineers had when they were good at the work. He was interested in how things actually functioned rather than how they appeared to function. He had spent 40 minutes asking her questions about working dogs at that dinner with the curiosity of someone genuinely interested rather than someone making conversation. She had liked him immediately and had been careful about liking him immediately, which was her standard approach to things she cared about. Atlas had met Thomas 3 weeks later in the park near Sarah's apartment. He had assessed Thomas in the way he assessed everyone new: thorough, neutral, no assumptions, and had arrived at his conclusion within 10 minutes. The conclusion was visible in the specific quality of relaxation that Atlas produced when he had decided something was not a threat. He had leaned against Thomas's knee on the park bench and closed his eyes. Sarah gave this significant weight. Atlas's professional opinion was that Thomas Reeves was safe. She had 17 months of her own evidence that agreed. The wedding had been planned for 14 months, 112 guests, St. Catherine's Church, which Thomas's family had attended for 3 generations. A reception at a vineyard 20 minutes east. Sarah's mother had flown in from Lagos, her 2 sisters from London and Toronto respectively, the logistics of which had required more coordination than several operations Sarah had run in uniform. Everything had been organized with the precision that 2 people who were both, in their different ways, professionals about precision, could bring to it. Thomas had handled the venue contracts. Sarah had handled the timeline. Together they had produced a plan that had no gaps and no ambiguities and was scheduled to begin in 31 seconds when Atlas sat down in front of the church doors and changed everything. The change had started at 11:47. Sarah had been fully dressed, final photographs being taken in the bridal room, when Atlas, who had been lying in the corner in the specific way he rested when he was genuinely off duty, loose and easy, the working face completely absent, stood up, not stretched and stood immediately, the way he stood when something had changed in his environment that required his full attention. His nose had started working, his ears had come forward, his eyes had gone to the wall shared with the hallway. He had held that position for 20 seconds. Then he had walked to Sarah and sat down in front of her in the alert position. It had taken her 4 seconds to make the decision. She had put down the bouquet. She had told the photographer she needed a moment. She had followed Atlas out of the bridal room and down the hallway toward the ceremony, and he had not been leading her toward the ceremony. He had been leading her to the side door, to the hallway, to the groomsman's room. She had gotten as far as the hallway when the wedding coordinator found her and redirected her to the entrance, and she had walked the final steps to the doors and stood there for 31 seconds with Atlas sitting in front of her and the bridesmaids behind her and the music starting inside and Atlas looking at the side door and then at her and then at the side door. And she had crouched down and looked at him and said, Show me. The hallway that ran behind the main church was narrow and fluorescent lit, the kind of utilitarian space that existed in every large building behind the public-facing rooms. Concrete floor, gray walls, the smell of cleaning products, and old wood. Atlas moved at his working pace, deliberate, low, nose active, not running. He had never run when he was tracking something real. Running was for the end when the location was confirmed. This was still the approach. Sarah followed 2 steps behind. She had left her duty weapon at home. You did not wear a holster under a wedding dress, and she had decided 3 months ago, when they started planning the ceremony, that she would be off duty in every sense on this day. She had a phone in the bouquet bag she had left in the bridal room. She had no radio. She was following her dog down a church hallway in a $4,000 dress, unarmed, without communication, which was objectively a situation she would have laughed at if someone had described it to her a week ago. She was not laughing now. Atlas stopped outside the third door on the right, the groomsmen's room. He sat. He looked at the door. He looked at Sarah. Then he did something she had only seen him do twice in 4 years. He looked at the door and then looked at the floor directly in front of it and then back at her. The specific sequence that meant not just threat present, but threat close, threat immediate, act now. She put her hand flat against the door. She could hear 2 voices, not clearly. The door was solid and the hallway absorbed sound, but the quality of the conversation was legible, even without words. Low, pressured, the specific compression of an argument that was being kept quiet because the location required it. One voice she recognized, Thomas. The other she did not. She stood with her hand on the door for 3 seconds and made a decision that was not actually a decision because there was only one thing she was going to do. She turned the handle and pushed the door open. Thomas was at the window with his back to her, his right hand pressed flat against the glass. His posture, the posture of a man who has been standing in the same position under sustained pressure for long enough that the body has started to show it. Across from him was a man Sarah had never seen. Mid-50s, heavy, a suit that was slightly too formal, the kind of formal that was not about occasion but about signal, the suit of a man who wanted you to understand that he took himself seriously. He had the particular stillness of someone accustomed to rooms where he controlled the terms. He saw Sarah first. His face went through 3 expressions in under 2 seconds. Surprise, assessment, selection. He chose a version of neutral that was not quite neutral, the way people chose expressions when they needed a moment to decide what they wanted to communicate. Thomas turned. His face did something that Sarah, in 17 months of reading him carefully, had never seen it do. It went white the way faces went white, not from shock, but from the specific event of 2 separate things colliding into one room that were supposed to stay separate. Sarah. His voice was careful. This isn't. The ceremony starts in 41 minutes, Sarah said. She kept her voice at the register she used for situations where her emotional state was not available for negotiation. Who is this? The man smiled, rehearsed. An old friend of the family. He paused. Congratulations on your wedding day, Officer Okafor. He knew her name, her rank, the specific detail that told her this was not a coincidence and not a casual acquaintance, and not anything that a satisfactory explanation was going to cover. Atlas was at her right knee. He was looking at the man with the focused, unblinking attention she recognized as his confirmed threat response. Not the approach to a threat, the confirmation of one, not the cheese. Thomas, Sarah said, tell me who this is. Thomas's jaw worked. She watched him search for a version of this that was manageable. She had watched him be precise and careful and honest for 17 months, and she knew what his face looked like when he was being those things. This was not those things. This was a man trying to manage. His name is Marcus Vey, Thomas said. We have a business arrangement. What kind? Thomas didn't answer. Atlas made a sound. Below a growl, the specific low note she associated with situations where the confirmation had been made and the dog was communicating it. She had heard that sound 4 times in 4 years. Each time it had preceded something real. Thomas, her voice was the same. Level, specific, not moving. Tell me exactly what is happening in this room right now. And Thomas, who was a precise man standing in front of his canine handler fiancée and her working dog, and understanding that the combination had made management impossible, started to tell her. Thomas's father had built a construction business in the 1980s that had required, at a critical moment in 1987, outside capital to survive a cash flow crisis. The capital had come from a man named Vey through an arrangement that was not written down and was understood by both parties to be the kind of arrangement that did not end with repayment. The business had survived. It had grown. The arrangement had stayed in the background for 30 years, a fact the family knew and managed and did not discuss. Thomas's father had died in 2020. Thomas had inherited the business and its assets, and he had discovered 3 months later a specific outstanding obligation, a debt to Marcus Vey that his father had believed he had resolved but had not, because Vey's accounting worked differently from standard financial mathematics. The debt was $420,000 principal and had become, by Vey's calculation, $680,000 with interest. Thomas had been managing it. That was the word he used, managing. He had been liquidating assets, restructuring accounts, working toward a settlement he believed he could reach without Sarah needing to know it had ever existed. He had believed this was protective. He said this without emphasis, without justification, as a fact about what he had believed, not as a defense, Sarah noticed, just as a description of the decision and its premise. Vey had appeared that morning, here, now in the groomsmen's room at 11:45 on the day of their wedding, because his patience had a specific limit, and that limit was today. He had a timeline. Thomas had not met it. He had come to make clear that the timeline remained in effect regardless of the occasion. Sarah listened to all of this without moving. 9 minutes. Atlas sat at her knee for all 9 minutes and did not take his eyes off Vey. When Thomas stopped speaking, the room was quiet. Outside in the main church, she could hear the distant sound of organ music, the specific quiet of 112 people waiting for something to begin. She looked at Vey. How much of what he told you is documented? Vey's smile came back, the rehearsed one. None of it. That's the nature of this kind of arrangement. Then you have nothing. I have an understanding with his family that predates through any paperwork you might want to reference. Sarah looked at him for a moment. Then she turned to Thomas. I need you to leave this room. Go find Father Hennessy. Tell him the ceremony is delayed and that he needs to call the police non-emergency line and ask for an officer at St. Catherine's. Do you understand? Thomas stared at her. Sarah, I can handle. I'm not asking you a question, she said. The voice was still level. It had not changed in 9 minutes, and it was not going to change. Go. Something moved in Thomas's face. He went. Vey watched the door close. Then he looked at Sarah with the specific assessment of a man recalculating his position. You understand this doesn't resolve the arrangement, he said. The debt is real whether you involve the police or not. You voluntarily entered a room with an on-duty K-9 officer. This was not entirely accurate. She was technically off-duty, but Vey did not know the technical situation, and she was not going to clarify it, and made statements that constitute credible evidence of financial coercion in front of a trained police dog whose service record will be entered as evidence. Vey looked at Atlas. Atlas looked at Vey with the unwavering, specific attention of a dog that had confirmed a threat and was now in position. I'd like you to stay where you are until the officers arrive, Sarah said. If you move toward the door, I will release him. He'll reach you before you reach the handle. Vey looked at the pie for a long moment. He looked at the 78 pounds of Belgian Malinois and the 7 years of police officer behind it, and he made the calculation that men in his position made when the room's mathematics had changed in a direction they had not anticipated. He stayed where he was. She thought about what she had given up to be in this room. The ceremony, the dress, the 14 months of planning, the 112 people in the pews who had come from 3 countries. Her mother who had flown from Lagos. Her sisters. Father Hennessy who had been preparing this service for 6 weeks. Sarah gave her statement in the vestibule of St. Catherine's Church in her wedding dress. Atlas at her left foot, speaking to a detective named Alvarez from the Financial Crimes Unit who had arrived 40 minutes after the patrol officers. She described Atlas's alert in the bridal room at 11:47, the directional behavior toward the hallway, the confirmation outside the groomsman's door. She described it in the chronological order that 7 years of report writing had made automatic. Not the emotional order, not the order that made the best story, the factual order, the order that would survive scrutiny. She described what she had heard through the door before she opened it. She described Vay's statements in Thomas's account in the specific details Thomas had given her. The father's arrangement, the inherited debt, the amount, the timeline, the decision to manage it without her knowledge. Alvarez listened without interrupting. She was 15 years on the force, the particular economy of a person who had stopped wasting motion a long time ago. When Sarah finished, Alvarez looked at Atlas. He alerted through a wall, Alvarez said, from the bridal room to the groomsmen's room on the other side. They share a wall, Sarah said. If Vay was already in there when Atlas picked up the scent, he works volatile organic compounds. Stress response produces specific compounds. He detects them through barriers. The distance was approximately 12 feet through drywall and plaster. In 4 years. One false positive, Sarah said. A man in a park with a large quantity of aged cheese. Alvarez looked up from her notepad. I'm not joking, Sarah said. It's in his service record. The compounds were present. The source was Gouda. Alvarez allowed a small, precise smile that lasted exactly as long as was warranted and then was gone. The federal investigation into municipal contract fraud already has Vay in its periphery, she said. What you've given us today puts him at the center. Thomas Reeves is a witness. His cooperation will determine his position in what comes next. Sarah nodded. She understood the structure of this. Where is Thomas now? Alvarez gestured toward the church steps. Sarah looked through the open door. Thomas was sitting on the steps outside with his elbows on his knees and his head forward, the posture of a man who had been sitting with something heavy for a long time and had finally put it down and did not yet know what the putting down meant. 2 officers were nearby, not guarding him, present. He had called for help the moment Sarah told him to. He had done exactly what she said. Sarah looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at Alvarez. What happens to the guests? We'll clear the church shortly. I'd suggest you let the coordinator make the announcement. Sarah nodded. She sat down in a pew in the side chapel and Atlas lay across her feet, and she thought. This was what she did in situations that had produced more information than she had been expecting. She sat and she thought, and she let the information arrange itself into what it actually was rather than what she wanted it to be. What she actually knew, Thomas had inherited a problem he had not created. She understood the difference between creating a problem and inheriting one. She had worked enough cases to know that distinction was real and mattered. He had made a decision to resolve it alone. That decision had a logic she could follow. Protect her from something ugly, handle it quietly, never let it touch her. She could see exactly how he had arrived at that decision. She could also see exactly what was wrong with it. The decision assumed that she needed protecting from information, that she could not be trusted to handle the full picture, that the correct response to something difficult was to remove her from it rather than to bring her into it. In 17 months of knowing Thomas, she had believed, based on everything she had observed, that he understood her differently than that he knew she was a person who required honesty rather than management. The question she was sitting with in the pew was whether she had been wrong about what she knew, whether the man she had read carefully for 17 months had been accurately read, or whether she had missed something, or whether this was a single decision made under specific pressure by a person who was otherwise what she had believed him to be. She thought about the alternative, the version of this day where Atlas had stayed in the corner of the bridal room with his working face absent, where she had walked down the aisle and said the words and signed the document and driven to the vineyard and had dinner and danced and been photographed and gone home and started a life. That life would have contained a thing she did not know about, a debt, a man named Vay, an arrangement that predated her, a decision Thomas had made that she was not permitted to be part of. She did not know how long it would have taken her to find it. She did not know what finding it later would have cost. She knew what finding it now had cost, which was the ceremony and the plan and the specific day she had expected. And she knew what it had given her, which was the complete picture and the choice of what to do with it. She preferred the complete picture. She had always preferred the complete picture. She did not know the answer yet. She needed time and she needed more information, and she needed to not be in a wedding dress in a church on the day the question had first appeared. One thing she knew with certainty: Atlas had been right. Atlas had stood up in the corner of the bridal room and started working, and led her one step at a time to the thing she had not known she needed to find. He had done it the only way he knew how to do anything, directly, without management, without calculation about whether she could handle what was at the end of the direction. He had found the thing and he had shown her. That was all. She put both hands on his face and looked at him. He looked back at her with the clear, uncomplicated attention of a dog who had done his job completely and had no opinion about what she decided to do with the information. "Good boy," she said. It was the most complete thing she could say. It covered all of it. The federal case against Marcus Vey took 11 months. The Financial Crimes Unit, working with the existing investigation, built a picture that went back 30 years. A network of undocumented capital arrangements in the construction and contracting sector, enforced through pressure and timeline and the specific leverage of obligations that existed only in the understanding of the parties. Vey had been operating in this way for 3 decades. Thomas's father had been one of dozens of arrangements. Thomas had been, when Vey arrived in the groomsmen's room on that Saturday morning, the most recent pressure point. He was not the last. The prosecution identified 11 others. Vey pleaded guilty to 4 counts of criminal extortion in the 9th month of the investigation. He was 61 years old. His lawyer argued for leniency. The judge gave him 9 years. Thomas was a witness, not a defendant. His cooperation was complete. His lawyer described his position accurately. A man who had inherited an obligation, attempted to resolve it through legitimate means, and had delayed disclosure to a law enforcement officer under circumstances the prosecution agreed were understandable if not procedurally correct. He was not charged. He spent 8 months in the specific condition of a person whose life is under examination. Everything documented, everything reviewed, every decision from the past 3 years looked at from every angle. He did not complain about this. He understood it was necessary. Sarah went back to work the Monday after the wedding that had not happened. She and Atlas worked their shift. She filed the supplementary report on Atlas's alert at 11:47 and his confirmed threat response and the events that followed. The report went into his service record. Alvarez called her 2 weeks later to say it had been cited in the federal filing as corroborating evidence for the timeline of Vey's approach and his intent. Atlas's professional opinion was part of the federal record now. Sarah told him this in the car on the way home from the shift where she got the call. He was looking out the passenger window at nothing in particular, completely relaxed, the working face entirely absent. He did not seem impressed. He had never seemed impressed by the downstream consequences of his work. He found things. That was the work. What happened after was not his department. She and Thomas had their first real conversation 6 weeks after the Saturday in October. Not a debrief. She had given the debrief to Alvarez the day of. A conversation. They sat across from each other in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the apartment he had moved into, and Sarah asked him the question she had been holding since the pew in the side chapel. Not, "Why didn't you tell me about the debt?" She understood the debt. Not, "Why didn't you tell me about your father's arrangement?" She understood the inheritance. The question was, when did you decide that I was someone who needed to be protected from difficult information rather than someone who could be trusted with it? Thomas sat with this question for almost a full minute without speaking. She waited. She was good at waiting. He said, "I think I decided it without deciding it. I think I had a version of you in my head that I was protecting, and the version wasn't wrong, but it wasn't complete. I knew you were capable of handling anything. I also, and I understand how this sounds, I wanted to be the person who handled this for you, not because I thought you couldn't, because I wanted to be that for you." Sarah listened to this carefully. She heard what was true in it and what was insufficient in it. She said, the problem isn't that you wanted to handle it. The problem is that you made the decision alone about what I needed to know. That's not protection. That's a version of management. That's deciding for me. Thomas said yes. He said it without qualification. Not yes, but just yes. He knew it was true. He had known it was true since the moment she had opened the groomsman's door, and he had seen her face and understood that the version he had been managing had collapsed. She sat with his answer for a moment. She heard what was true in it, the genuine desire to carry something so she didn't have to, the specific form of care that expressed itself as shielding. She had seen this before in cases, in the people she worked with, in her own family. The instinct was not wrong. The execution had been. There was a difference between protecting someone from a threat and protecting someone from information. The first was sometimes necessary. The second was always a form of not trusting them. She told him this, not as an accusation, as a fact about what she had observed. He listened. He did not argue. He said, "You're right." He said it in the way he said things when he had already arrived at the same place and was confirming rather than conceding. That conversation lasted an hour and a half. There were 4 more over the following 3 months. Each one was more accurate than the last. In February, they had dinner. In April, Thomas came to the park where Atlas had met him for the first time. Atlas assessed him the way he assessed everyone after an absence. Thorough, neutral, no assumptions carried forward from previous encounters. He arrived at his conclusion in 11 minutes. The conclusion was the same as the first time. He leaned against Thomas's knee and closed his eyes. Sarah noted the timing, 11 minutes. The first time had been 10, consistent within margin. Professional opinion unchanged. They did not make plans that day. They walked and Atlas moved slightly ahead of them on the path, which was his preferred position when both of them were present. Able to see both directions, able to see what was coming. Not leading, just positioned to see everything clearly. In June, Sarah was promoted to sergeant in the K-9 unit. Atlas was at her side at the ceremony. Her captain said, "Your dog service record is better than most officers I promoted." Sarah said, "He has better instincts." Her captain looked at the dog. Atlas looked back. A year after the Saturday in October, Sarah took Atlas to the park in the evening, the one 3 blocks from her apartment, the one where he had met Thomas and given his professional opinion and closed his eyes. She sat on a bench. Atlas lay at her feet. The evening came in slowly across the grass, the light going gold and flat the way it went in October, the specific quality of light that did not announce itself but arrived and was simply there. She thought about the 31 seconds, about what it had cost to crouch down in a wedding dress and say, "Show me," about what it had given her, which was not the wedding she had planned and was also not a life built on incomplete information, about the difference between those two things and which one she would choose if she had the choice again, about the fact that she had had the choice, that Atlas had given it to her by doing the only thing he knew how to do, finding the true thing and showing her directly, without calculation, without deciding whether she could handle it. Trusting her to follow, she put her hand on the back of his neck. In the place she had learned was the place he leaned into. He leaned into it. The October light came across the park, and the evening was quiet and the work was done, and they sat together until it was time to go home. That was the whole of it. That was enough.